Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Hopelessly Gifted podcast. I am your host, Mark Talaga. So today's episode is going to be a very educational episode, and it's a little ironic that it is about the audio medium, listening to it over a podcast, because it's really all about reading and dyslexia in particular. Now, I'm sure we'll branch out into many other topics, but as all you very savvy listeners are aware, reading is a very large problem, just as a whole, among our growing youth. But I would say even more specifically in relation to the gifted out there, where it can be underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, misunderstood, difficult to help with. But I have brought on somebody very helpful in helping to give us a sense of what we can do about that. So I'm very happy to welcome Faye Bankler Casell. Faye has received her MA in Early Childhood Ed and Special Ed from Teachers College, Columbia. After teaching as an early childhood educator in public and private programs across the U.S., Faye later went on to redesign an early childhood inclusion program that received notice from the U.S. Department of Education, NPR, and awards from a national organization. Faye is now a certified academic language therapist and dyslexia therapist, supporting parents in the early reading development of their dyslexic children through her business, homereadingcoach.com, her socials, and her YouTube channel, Teach My Child to Read. In addition to working privately with clients in person and virtually, Faye will soon be launching a parent-led therapist coach dyslexia program for parents wanting to support dyslexia in the home environment. Welcome, Faye.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. All right. So I have lots of questions for you. But first and foremost, I want to know just a little bit about you. You've got clearly a wonderful background in education and special education, particularly. What drove you towards focusing on dyslexia?
Sure, that's a great question. And there's a personal element to it. My son is neurodivergent, he's 2E. And I had been on the lookout that he might have dyslexia because of some early language delays and various things. And sure enough, when he hit kindergarten, he really struggled with reading. Ultimately, it was ADHD, but which can often look very much like dyslexia, particularly I would say in the gifted population. So I really fell back on my special ed background and using multisensory teaching to launch him. And I did launch him. And that drove me in the direction of dyslexia therapy and becoming a certified academic language therapist. And what I'm finding now is that a lot of, like you said, a lot of kids are not getting identified, or they're being identified, what's happening in the gifted population. But this school is determining that there isn't significant enough educational impact to warrant specialized services. That's
Oh,
their
yeah.
language, not mine.
Right. You're not failing hard enough, so why would we give you something extra?
100%. 100%. And within the context of the national literacy crisis that you referenced, just to kind of give listeners a little bit of context for that if they've missed. So everything can vary a little bit state by state, but nationwide, we've got almost 70% of fourth graders who are not proficient readers. Third grade is when typically schools make that shift from learning to read to learn. And a lot of the content is delivered via reading. So we've got a whole bunch of kids who are not proficiently reading and therefore not accessing the general curriculum, what's called the tier 1 instruction. So the whole classroom, whole grade instruction has not been sound. And so the tier 2, that intervention level, which is really ideally supposed to be kind of an off ramp. You come in, you get caught up, you get off, is turning
Right.
more into sort of a long distance journey for way too many kids. And so then you've got this gifted population who is often able to mask very early and gets missed.
So overall, we have an issue with reading at a national, let's say, epidemic
Mm-hmm.
level. And I don't know, just out of curiosity, what do you see as contributing to that? Where is that coming from? Why is that happening now?
Oh, goodness. So you mentioned in my intro that I studied at Teachers College, Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
While I was there, I did an internship and studied over a very influential, I would say, rock star. There was a lot of idol worship of this curriculum writer. And she's one of many. If your listeners or if you have not listened to the podcast Sold a Story, it will make you want to spit venom and just rip your hair out. That really does a deep dive. But essentially what happened is that some reading instruction that was never sound
Mm-hmm.
scientifically uh, was really pushed hard through the schools, what we would call the 3Qing. So when I did my internship with this reading program, I would come home and I would tell my husband, this is so weird. The teacher will have the sentence from the book up, and then she'll have a whole post-it note over the word, and she will encourage the children to guess what they think the word's going to be. And they'll look at the
Oh,
picture and they'll look at the. So essentially, we have had a generation of teachers teaching kids to read like dyslexics, because that's what
I see.
dyslexic kids often do
Right,
is they
right,
guess. They look at the
right.
picture for, they look at the first letter, they make these guesses. So the other piece that's happening is, so this 3Qing was getting pushed, and there was this idea that if you just exposed kids to high quality literature,
Mm.
they would almost learn it through osmosis. And one of the founders of this process, we even have recordings of her saying, we don't know the mystery that's happening behind kids' eyes and in their brains when they're reading. Sort of like it's this mysterious, kind of thing, this magical thing.
Right.
And in fact, what was happening at the universities is you have the School of Education teaching these models that are not sound. And across the university, you have the School of Psychology doing brain scans on people as they're reading and studying the brain science. And there's the disconnect,
Right.
the brain science was not being taught in the schools of education. And even now, during this kind of big reckoning, I think the statistic is something along the lines of there are still 70 something percent of school districts teaching curriculum that are not aligned with the science of reading.
My goodness. So, right, if I'm hearing you correctly, we've got, a process in place that basically teaches kids to, yes, guess, use context clues, and not actually process the words in the order and the structure of the sentence and whatever it may be. And then additionally, you have somebody running the show saying, we don't really know how reading works in the brain. And
Well,
it's like,
she
yes, we
she
do.
is, yeah, I know. So that was a recording from when she started her career. But I
Fair
want you
enough.
to know that 2 years ago, I want to say 3 years ago, my friend's son was had been identified for intervention, and she said they're using this woman. She's a New Zealander. Oh my goodness! And the name of the program is Reading Recovery. Is the name of her program,
Okay.
and her program became hugely popular in the United States. And then it morphed into a variety of other programs using that as the foundation. And that's what I had studied at Teachers College.
I see.
So my friend, 2 years ago, tells me her son's been identified for intervention and they're doing reading recovery. And I just pulled up, sold a story and hit send to her. And I said, you gotta fight them on this.
Yeah.
They need to know better. But the same thing
Right.
happened in my son's school. I walked into his classroom. It's a wonderful school. And the thing about the literacy crisis that it would be easy to write it off as perhaps like a socioeconomic, it's not happening in the better schools. But 30% of these kids that are in this category that are not proficient readers, they're children of college graduates. The
Sure.
numbers of parents who believe that their children are reading on grade level is exponentially higher than the number of children who actually are. And when I walked into my own son's school a few years ago, really, I mean, pretty stable economic group. There weren't even a lot of apartments because of the area that it captured. There weren't even a lot of apartments that maybe had, you get a little bit of turnover in a school when you've got an apartment community. The first of the month, you might have some new students or some students depart. Even that was fairly stable. Lots of resources. I walked into the classroom. I said, "Can you show me what you use for your ELA instruction?" And she handed me a book, and I turned to her and I said, "Are you aware that this has been debunked? That this is not,
Right.
aligned?"
Right.
And she was not an educator. She was just giving me the tour. And I said, "I'll take
Right.
that to the
Right.
school."
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You could take that to another level. But
Yeah.
the idea is, look, this is happening whether we want to convince ourselves it isn't or not. There is an actual issue with people reading. And I will say, even in my office, one of the things we assess for, as we're working with these children and young adults is, what is their relationship with reading? And a lot of people will say to me, they're excellent readers, they're voracious readers. But then we find out a little deeper that the kind of reading they do is very limited and very interest driven. But when it comes to reading something of a more substantial text or something outside of their interest area or expertise, all of a sudden that comprehension, that ability to read falls apart.
Right.
And so I think there is this difficulty with people looking at saying, can my child really read? Is there a way that and again, it matters by age, I'm sure, but like, how would you help parents understand how to assess at a deeper level, can my child really read rather than, enjoy a book?
Right. That's a great question. So I am kind of developing my own tool that's part of a course that I'm laying out that will have parents assessing their kids from the outset. But in the meantime, there are a few things online, and I'll gladly send you some links so you could put them in the show notes.
That's great.
One good way, and it's a little counterintuitive, is that we have kids read non-words that follow um, decoding patterns. So
Right.
the reason that that's helpful is a lot of kids who are very bright,
Mm-hmm.
who are high achieving, high cognition, who are gifted from an early age, they can memorize the look of the words and they can coast on that for quite a few years, which is one of the reasons that it doesn't get caught. Because in first grade, you see all these kids where it's not clicking, but for your gifted kiddo who's able to kind of memorize and hold this whole bank of words in their head, they're not actually decoding them. They're not using word attack skills, but they've got them down in their memory. So these
Right.
nonsense words are actually really helpful as a way to get to, can you break apart the word? Um, Another thing that's really great for kiddos when you're looking specifically for dyslexia is not even reading, but breaking apart sounds, so
Hmm.
starting at a compound word level, like cowboy, take away the cow. And then moving into, just removing an initial, letter sound. So,
Hmm.
um, substituting, if I say, stripe and I take away that was two sounds. But
Right.
I was trying to think of
Right.
something off the top of my head. But playing around with the sounds, flipping the last sound, um, syllables, can you say
Right.
October? And then take away um, the toe, so or the Akbar, like, so really breaking
October.
into
Hmm.
the sounds, um, and seeing if they can manipulate them, because that's going to give you the information about, are they
That's really
actually
good.
able to
Yeah,
read?
you're talking about, yeah, are they able to decode a word phonetically, bit by bit,
Mm-hmm.
knowing each and every part of it, and then reconstruct it or shift it around? That's really more what we talk about when it comes to reading rather than memorizing,
Right,
recitation, or using context to figure out,
right.
what you think it's going to be and filling in the blanks. You know, oh, that's such a fascinating way to do it and a
I
very
will
helpful way to do it.
say for older kiddos,
Yeah.
one of the best gauges that we have, and you can look up like oral reading fluency (ORF). Um, but fluency is really closely aligned to comprehension, because in order to become a fluent reader, right, your brain is processing, and working through the decoding at a rate that allows you to read fluently. And you really can't comprehend what you're reading if your reading is, if it's
Right.
so labored, you're not going to be able to hang on to the ideas. So that's another great way
Yeah.
for those older kiddos. And as you said, it is completely normal and natural for anyone to be able to read at a higher level about a topic, characters that interest them,
Right.
and that's wonderful. Taking something that's less interesting and you know and a new topic that the kid needs to learn from the piece, and then asking comprehension questions is a way, and to get more deep into their thinking. And honestly, when I start working with younger kids, who are dyslexic, I even start with wordless books, and I have them talk me through the story. We can get to a really higher level of thinking skills. They're making hypotheses, they're synthesizing information, and
Right.
I'm able to hear if they're able to piece together a story and know how it
Right.
works.
Oh, that's really cool. Again, it's kind of like reading is maybe seen as this singular event that's important because we just need to be able to take in words in order to do something with it, but it just seems so connected to language, how we communicate, how we
Mm-hmm.
hear other people. Like, it's all our ability to read almost sounds like it's our same ability in our brain to decode what we're hearing, and
Yes.
that level of, okay, so I'm not too far off with that.
No, and there's, I would say for your listeners, which is why I was on the lookout for my son. If there is a history of any kind of speech or language delay,
Hmm.
if there's a history of any sort of hearing, issues, those are the kinds of things that you're going to look through first, because they're so tightly connected. For
Right.
for some kids who really do have maybe some auditory processing issues, I myself have those. My husband says that he grew up, his mom was a cruise travel agent. He grew up on cruise ships, and he says that talking to me is like a ship to shore phone call where he'll say
Oh,
something to me. I'll say what, he just waits, and then I kick in with the answer because it just takes some time.
right.
So when you've got any of those things going on, you're at more risk. For kids who
Hmm.
struggle to maybe hear the sounds that they're saying or that other people are saying, we do a lot of, looking in the mirror and watching our mouths, feeling them, seeing how the sound's coming out. Because for some kids, they really do need those cues to clue them in on the distinction between, t, the
Right. Did I say
the
bat or did I say
yeah,
bad?
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So they really rely on those visual and physical cues.
So, well, that brings up an interesting point. The idea of what you're looking for within a kid, or maybe even within yourself, to some of the listeners out there. But the idea of what are those like little, not red flags, maybe but like little yellow flags of, hey, I'm seeing a certain kind of behavior that may lead me to want to evaluate further.
Right. I would definitely say if your child responds initially with a huh, what,
Hmm.
I don't know, and then is able to sort of craft together a response. That's an indicator that there might be some processing happening. Dyslexia, just to back up for a second,
Yeah.
dyslexia is a language processing issue. When
Right.
when we were younger, the generation before, they thought it was a vision issue. And still a lot of parents, when they come onto these Facebook groups and things, they'll say, I dyslexia. My kid's teacher thinks he has dyslexia, but he doesn't write his letters backwards, or I don't think he's reading backwards. It
Right.
hasn't quite caught up the information. So, um, and I know when you and I talked earlier, I mentioned the episode that we listened to, the audiologist. What was her name?
Oh, Dr.
Christy?
Christie. Yeah, she's the
Yes.
best.
She was so great. And I loved her description of a processing issue of being kind of the difference between the hardware and the software. So
Right.
for a kid with dyslexia, all the hardware, the ears, the mouth, the speech, everything could be working great. It's the software system that's running, the processing the information, that there's some disconnects there. So early speech, motor delays, struggles to pick up letter names,
Hmm.
um, the sound name correspondence, letter correspondence. Usually for kids, they're most motivated. The first letters they're going to learn are their names, right? Or
Right.
maybe their family's name if there's a sibling. Those are going to be the most important letters to them. Um, any kind of sometimes you'll hear people kind of say an approximate word to what they really meant. You
Oh,
know,
interesting.
so the other day, for example, somebody was talking about tuition to a school, but said admission, right? Just sort of close in sounds, but
Right.
off. I worked with this lovely teaching assistant who was dyslexic, and she was great working with the kids. And one of the things that she was doing this one day was reading aloud to them a word problem, I think, from math. And she said, a quarter is 1/4 of a whale. And I said, could you just check your vowel on that last word? And she was like, uh, 1/4 of a whole. And she goes, oh, that makes so much more sense. So
That's right.
just those
Yeah,
really,
go back for a second.
really,
Uh-huh.
really close, like in the ballpark of the word. Um, a big indicator when reading has started is those little frequent everyday words, the to and the, those kinds of things, where they'll skip over them a lot. Or
Hmm.
another thing is that maybe if the story is something about the puppy went to the farm and they say the dog went to the barn or something, where they're picking up through the context of the pictures,
Right.
and they're sort of getting the narrative down, but they're not actually reading the correct letters and sounds.
See, this is interesting because it's going to bring up something that a lot of parents come to me with some relative concern around, especially in like the tween teenagers,
Mm,
which is my kid loves to read manga books, but loves to read
mm-hmm.
comic books, loves that's how they read. Is there a real concern there that that is somewhat either covering up, or is it, hey, they're reading, so let's just be happy that they're putting words in their brain?
I mean, I think that both can be true. You
There you
know,
go. Okay, that's a very good answer.
I think that yes, my son also loves graphic novels.
Yeah.
He can tell you all about a bazillion wars, and I mean, he's really excited because he's learning about the fall of the Roman Empire right now, right? Like,
That's cool.
um, but he loves graphic novels, and these stories are told really well through them. And I think it works really well with his brain. So you want to look at both. I mean, especially as you're getting to the tween and whatever, when you're talking about the goal of reading is comprehension, and so much of
Mm-hmm.
instruction is driven through reading, you do want to make sure not only can your kid read for pleasure and are they enjoying it, but when it comes to needing to read something to learn about a new topic, are they able to do it? There are certainly ways to accommodate, especially now, just audiobooks and a variety
Mm-hmm.
of different, even apps that, because another thing, and I would be curious, if you hear this from any of your listeners, but another thing that really happens a lot is a kid will get a diagnosis and then all of a sudden a parent will be like, oh my God, I think I have dyslexia. They're like, suddenly my
Yep.
whole life makes sense. Um,
Right.
and, they've probably learned how to accommodate themselves. But now, with the advent of iPhones and apps, I mean, you can snap off a picture, a PDF of a page, and have it read to you. So
Right.
I definitely think that if parents are coming to you at that age, yes, you always want to shore up reading and confidence, but you
Right.
really are going to need to push how can we accommodate so that the child can access the curriculum, um, whether it's listening in an audiobook, that sort of thing, because you don't have time to waste on them
Right. Well, and
accessing.
again, it's not about doing it perfectly, but it is about how we're building up the part of the brain that's starting to take in more language, more comprehension, and that's going to look maybe differently to all different kinds of kids. So
Right.
like a lot of the times we'll recommend, if we find out through assessment that there are reading issues, can we do a listening while reading modality, right? Can they listen to
Mm-hmm.
the audiobook while they're reading it as a way to strengthen up that skill set? Is that something that you see as helpful as well?
Yeah, I do that. I do that a lot with kids that
Okay.
I work with. When you're doing a dyslexia therapy protocol, you really got a lot of concepts and things to get through. Um, but usually with kiddos, especially during our summer sessions, I really like to do novel studies with them, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll do a variety of me reading, them following along, them reading, us taking turns, that kind of stuff. Because I really want them to be able to have a variety of ways to access and see what's working for them.
Right.
Another thing is rereading is really helpful, and even switching up the modalities. So, one just wonderful young girl that moved on and went to middle school, and she's in an academically rigorous middle school. When we were transitioning away towards services, we had the conversation where I said, if you can continue getting your hands on the required reading that's going to happen for your daughter during this school year, having the summer for her to go through it once and then she's going to go through it with her class, so
Right.
we were doing audiobooks, we were doing those reads together, because the first time you're getting through it, you're just trying to make sure you're kind of saying the words and hitting the
Right.
right words, then to go back and revisit it and really sort of, okay, now what does it mean? And I mean, adults have to do that. I still have to do that with dense texts that are, and
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's. I had to do a book report as part of, we had to do hundreds of hours of different things to be an academic language therapist, but I had to do this book report. And this book was all brain science. It was so dense, and I kept
Oh,
reading it and rereading it and rereading it. And I found this series of webinars with the author where they broke down the chapters, and I was like, I'm going to dyslexia therapy myself. And so I would read the chapter, I would watch the webinar and listen to the talk, I would reread the chapter. So, you don't necessarily need to have dyslexia or any kind of, you just hit a certain
no.
level of content and you're going to have to find a way to support yourself.
Well, I really like that because no matter what it is and what age you are, whether you have a formal diagnosis or not, if you're having this issue with reading that you've noticed, yeah, there's plenty of different ways to do it. We had a neuropsych assessor recommend that a lot of kids, before they start to read a novel for school, they read, yes, the summary or the cliff notes, or then they read reviewers, how they review and critique the book and their understanding of like, here's what I liked, here's what I didn't, just to get a sense of a flavor of what this is. Do I have a concept? So they're not going into this book blind and then burning the candle at both ends to try to make sense of it while, managing their own emotions. But you know what I'm saying? Right. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So I do this with kids before we read passages, stories, whatever, teacher speak, we call it activating background
Yeah.
knowledge, but
There you go. Okay. I
really
like that. That's
kind
good.
of any things that that would already relate to the story. Sometimes I have to teach them about certain concepts so that they can have that background knowledge before we dive in.
Right.
Um, I would say that I really learned that lesson. I had a fifth grader, and we were reading this whole passage about chimps, and she was answering the questions, and I was like, oh, what's going on here? And at the end, she said, so what is a chimp? And I was like,
Isn't that,
I assumed
uh-huh.
she understood that we were talking about a chimpanzee in space. And I got through the whole lesson and conversation with her, and I thought, oh my gosh. So, so really starting at the beginning and just making
Wow.
sure that we all understand the lay of the land, what direction we're
Yep.
headed in. Um, I love the idea of doing the reviews and different things. Sometimes, a lot of times, what I will do with kids is pick out words maybe that I think are going to be challenging from a decoding standpoint or from a
Mm.
comprehension standpoint. We'll define them, we'll talk about them, we'll break them down. In dyslexia therapy, we do a lot of coding of words if they're really struggling on the pronunciation. And then we'll actually go into the text, maybe with a highlighter, and find them and just start, marking them up so that once we hit that word, remember, oh, that's what we talked about. That's what, just kind of be on the lookout for it and skimming ahead. So those are all ways to front load what you're
Man.
about to read and go through.
Faye, your ability to know, like all this work that goes into really helping kids decode and all the different ways you can go about it and what you're focusing on. I mean, what a godsend, first and foremost. And I think there's a lot
Thank
of people
you.
listening that may very much say, wow, that would be great for my child. And we'll absolutely be linking things in the show notes. And so is there ever a point where you feel like there's something like where you're not able to break through because there's something else going on? Is there ever like a challenge point or a difficulty, or maybe there's a kid that's, not ready for this kind of learning yet? Anything like that ever happen?
Um, in my personal experience of using dyslexia therapy kind of as a launching point. I do find that for some kids on the autism spectrum, that the way that I'm teaching decoding can feel like it's a hindrance. It's not clicking with the sort of unique processing that their particular brain is happening. Obviously, you meet one person with autism, it's one person. Same thing with dyslexia.
Right.
Everybody's brain's a little bit unique. Um, I would say that the feedback that I often have to give parents is when there is a known or suspected attentional issue. Um,
Ah,
because if you've got a kiddo who maybe has some dyslexia, has something going on, and then there's this layer of attention, it's almost like you're learning to read underwater or something, so teasing through this additional layer of attention. So every family has to decide what's good for their family and talk to their doctor and see what works for them. But I will give them feedback that when I see a kid with any kind of ADHD on meds versus off meds,
sure.
I can see a huge difference. I've
Right.
worked with kids where I thought, oh my gosh, what we were doing so great. What's just happened? We have this huge setback, and then it turns out that there's maybe an adverse reaction to medication, that sort of thing, of perfectly reasonable. But I just have to tell the parents, just know that we're really having to slow down. Where
Right.
there's been some skill loss. So that one is a really big one. Um, Another thing that can be a challenge for gifted kids, for your population, this population, is you're talking about a group of kids who have often been praised and told from the very beginning how bright they are.
Hmm.
And they are magical. And they are excited to go to school because everybody's going to read and write. And a lot of kids who are gifted are very sensitive. First of all, if you talk about, I'm sure you have on here, but the growth mindset, the fixed mindset, a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
them can fall victim to the fixed mindset because they're so accustomed to being valued for their abilities. And so one of their deepest fears is not being smart and not being seen as smart and not trying things that might set them up to not be seen as smart. And so when you
For
get a
sure.
kiddo like that who struggles with reading and it's not clicking for them, and they start to notice that maybe kids who don't get that smart praise all the time or whatever, it's clicking for them,
Yeah.
you can run into a whole host of of emotional issues. A lot of hating school, a lot
Right.
of escapism. Um, there can also be kind of this risk of underachievement that can happen where they sort of might give up a little bit
Well,
more,
yeah. Right.
because
You're in my world now.
yeah, yeah, no, I
Because you're
totally
in,
am.
yeah, you're in this world. But the idea of what you're really recognizing, because again, underachievement comes with this sense of like moral failure, like they're not trying hard enough. And it's more this idea of you're noticing that there is a distinct gap between what you're trying to help them process through, and yes, some emotional dysregulation because their identity around what it means to be smart is fast, smart is capable, I can do this but I can't do that. It can create, yes, an enormous challenge. And this, what I like about what you're saying is that you're doing a really good job of teasing apart all the different factors that can influence what seems to be, this very clear problem with reading, but it is so much more that you have to be aware of, and how you work through a process of basically what you're saying is triaging. We're not ready for
Right,
this yet because we haven't dealt with, X, Y, and Z yet.
right. I really feel and care very deeply for parents who are supporting their kid through this because,
Right.
like you said, there are so many different layers. There's so many factors at play. The There's a woman named Sally Shaywitz who wrote this book, Overcoming Dyslexia, that I always recommend to families. And some of the things that I love about it are that she really goes through the lifespan,
That's good.
because you can sort of think about, what does it look like at this age? What are the ways that we support our kids at this age versus college? What are kind of accommodations do you want in place? Another thing that she does that's so great in this book is she talks to really successful adults with dyslexia. And I think that it's
Mm-hmm.
so hard when you're a kid and when you're a parent of a kid who is struggling. You just, how does this end? How does this work out? And then when you say, well, why don't you look at Steve Jobs and tell me, or Steven Spielberg, how did that work out?
Right.
So getting those kind of role models in place, and there are programs where older dyslexic kids will sort of mentor younger ones, just so I think kids can understand that this is a component of their brain. It's not the
Mm-hmm.
defining issue for them. One of the things that Sally Shaywitz talks about in her book that I love is that dyslexia is kind of an iceberg of weakness in a sea of strengths. And when I talk to kids about their dyslexia, and I actually will not work with families unless they allow me to talk to their kid about dyslexia, because there are some families who will not.
They don't want the words. Yeah, right.
They and and they're doing it out of love, and
Sure.
I don't need to judge them, but I
Yeah.
just, in
It's
my
just
personal
your process
experience,
needs to have that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. For sure.
because part of it is the way that I talk about it with them is, I make sure that they know what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of define it as this condition where smart kids struggle with reading. You know,
Yeah.
you're great at, let's name all the things you're really good at doing. You can do this. Reading is hard. Reading's harder for you.
Yeah.
You can do all these things. You're very smart. It's when smart kids struggle with reading, and then I'm able to say to them, oh, you know, 1 in 5 people are like you.
Mm-hmm.
And like, here, let's look at these examples here. You see all his brilliance and all these things he did. He has to accommodate the reading,
Right.
I think giving the children and the families kind of an idea of, this is workable. Now, I
Well,
will
that's the
say,
thing. What are you really dealing with? And you've got to be able to, on some level, say, hey, here, there is an issue that has nothing to do with you and your ability and your
mhm,
intelligence, but there is an issue where the software and the hardware are not interfacing. And that's creating, and doesn't that make sense on why it's such a challenge for you?
right,
That's great. Yeah.
yeah, and
So
I
talk to me. Oh, go ahead.
mm. No, I was just going to say, and the thing about, unfortunately, for your population of parents is they're very likely to be told that their kids are doing fine.
Oh,
That
for
they're
sure.
they're fine. They do fine.
Right.
Because
Right.
they're bright kids and they're
Right.
passing state exams and all that good stuff, whatever the
Right.
case may be. So, unfortunately, it is very likely that the burden, I don't want to call it a burden, but the job of helping
Yeah.
a child address dyslexia is going to fall to the family of this population. The schools are not going to be rushing to help a kid who's passing his classes and who's, I have lots of feelings about how we all deserve to work to our fullest potential, and they require the services. But so far, the Board of Ed is not listening to me. So um, I
So
am
far.
developing a home program specifically for parents who
Yeah.
want to kind of take on this work at home. It is designed to be parent led and dyslexia therapy coached, dyslexia therapist coached. So that's launching hopefully next month. And
That's
on my
amazing.
website, there's a sign up for it, and then building it out from there. There are other home programs. There are certified academic language therapists and a variety of people. Also available on my website, my Instagram. I have created what I call just the dyslexia roadmap for families. because there are so many people out there talking about dyslexia services, and there really are differences in who the providers are, the programs, the level of quality. So that's free. And I want to say
That's
it's
cool.
like 70 pages of, frequently asked questions and information that they can get off my website or my socials. Um, because they're going to have to do a lot of advocacy, and they're going to have to do a lot of good work.
Absolutely. Well, and we'll go into a growth mindset here that you're now, as a parent of a very complicated child, being given the opportunity to develop your advocacy skills, your ability to learn about something you never thought you'd learn about at a very deep level around dyslexia, reading, language. And maybe that's okay. Maybe
It is
that's
totally
not what you
okay.
expected.
It
All
is
right.
totally
Yeah.
okay.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I studied gifted education in Teachers College, and that is one of my certifications. And listen, it can be just as disruptive to have a prodigy, as to your family, as to have, a kiddo with multiple physical disabilities, right?
Sure.
Because
Sure.
you orient your family around the kids that you have, and you just never know what's on order. So the other thing I will say, though, while the parents might feel like tasked to solve a problem that, they feel like should be the school's problem, that kind of thing, it is an opportunity to grow, like you said. And
Yeah.
I've noticed, anecdotally, that those parents are able to advocate and really have a deep relationship with their kids because they understand what the weaknesses and the strengths are. It's
Right.
terrifying when you know that there are weaknesses, but you don't really understand what they are and what's being done. And so to have some ownership of that is really empowering for the families as a whole.
Oh, I love that because it does come back to the relationship. Maybe the world doesn't get it. Maybe the systems out there don't get it. But you know what? We're not going to allow that to define how we move forward, how we work together, how we understand the problem. That's exactly, the gift of hope that I want people to have. So, Faye, I am just loving your work. I'm so excited for this parent-led, dyslexia program. I hope any listeners out there that are interested find their way over to your socials and website. Can you give us those
Sure.
that website and those socials again for us?
Of course. So it's homereadingcoach.com. And I am on Instagram, Facebook, again, Home Reading Coach. I do have a YouTube channel that I'm just kind of getting off the ground. That's called Teach My Child to Read. And that's an opportunity to just do some deeper dives on different topics. Most recently, I posted a 3-part conversation that I had with 2 former licensed school psychologists who are now licensed psychologists, and are testing privately, but also test through what's called the IEE process. So, really just trying to, because I find that shockingly, it feels like every family has to reinvent the wheel and figure out where to get the information. So, like I said, offering that roadmap is a good first place to hook you up with organizations, advocacy, good resources. I want them to have. I do see kids privately, virtually, and then in person, where I am. And some families look for people over the summer. I do see kiddos over the summer just to kind of retain skills. And I also have access to lots of dyslexia therapy resources. So I'm happy for them to be in touch with me. It's Faye, Faye, at homereadingcoach.com. And yeah, I would love to hear from any listeners who would benefit.
Oh, the one-stop shop, Faye.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your insight and knowledge and your resources. And to all those listening out there, I want to thank you for listening. And until next time, we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.